Just over the course of this season, what's one thing that you guys have heard discussion about, that you guys have heard a narrative developing about in terms of like mainstream NFL discourse that you just think is totally wrong?
I'll go. Caleb Williams is a bust dialogue.
Oh, that's a great choice. Great choice.
Caleb, he's still my QB1. I think Drake May is fantastic, but Caleb is very special. I think that his tendency to hold the ball for a long time and make things happen out of structure is overall like a positive force for the USC offense, which is why he does it. I'm not necessarily sold that he can't do anything else. I just think that like he just breaks every tackle and, you know, can make any throw from any angle anywhere. So it's like, why not? And I think Lincoln Riley really encourages him, and Cliff Kingsbury, who's encouraged this behavior every single place that he's ever been, is like, just man, hold it. And like, we're going to design a second life into these plays. And like, you're going to, it's an offense 100% dependent on Caleb Williams making those plays. So he does. I think that he has exhibited a really special ability to make plays. And just because he's not a pocket passer doesn't mean that he's not a good football player. I think he's been the best football player in every single game that he has ever played at USC. So, or at Oklahoma for that matter, like just a truly dominant force at the college football world. He gets a lot of comparisons to Zach Wilson, who, you know, was all out of structure. As someone who is low on Zach Wilson coming out of BYU, like he was playing New Mexico Tech and looking like the best player out there. And a lot of his plays were seriously jump balls to Dax Milne, who was an NFL player. A couple of his offensive linemen were NFL players. Like, that's just not really the case in the Pac-12 with USC right now. Like, they're not that head and shoulders above everybody, like in terms of. So being low on Caleb Williams after this USC losing streak where Alex Grinch allows 50 a game, I think is totally unfair. Imagine Caleb Williams with a defense that was like normal and like, or a coaching staff that was like interested in a normal game script 21 to 28 game. Instead, it's like on him totally to make plays and put up 60 every week, and he does. So I think that he's a pretty special prospect. Maybe not perfect like he does. Like when there are open guys that maybe he turns down, like what he does is unsustainable, but I think that he can be different in the NFL. I just think like right now he kind of has to play differently because the defense has been so bad. So I'm still a huge Caleb Williams fan.
Do you think Caleb's the best prospect since Trevor?
Since Trevor? Pretty easily. I mean, who's been there since? Maybe looking back on it, maybe Stroud should have been, because he kind of was perfect at OSU. Like he was amazing in like his accuracy was super high level on all kinds of concepts down the field. Like his accuracy was good on the move. It was just like, well, how much will this translate when you go from Ohio State with everyone around you as a first round pick to the Texans? And clearly the answer was everything. So maybe like looking back on it, Stroud should have been viewed as more of that guy by me and really everybody besides Chris Sims. Shout out Chris Sims for he was really the one that was pounding the Stroud drum. So I got to exclude him in this. But like most analysts, I think, felt pretty similar to me, where it's like, we just don't know how it'll translate outside of that situation. So, but I like Caleb more than I liked Stroud at the time. Lawrence was the first year I scouted anybody. I really liked Lawrence. Like his pocket presence was immaculate, like huge arm, like great reading the field. So he may have checked more boxes, but you know, Justin Herbert might check more boxes than Mahomes right now in terms of skill set. That's kind of how I feel about May versus Williams. Is like, as a pocket passer, May is better. Yeah. But still, what Caleb's doing might be more impressive, you know? So we'll see how it projects. But yeah, I think Caleb's definitely the best that I have looked at since Lawrence. I mean, there was the Ritter year that the Howell Ritter Corral. Like that, I think that was the only year in between. Yeah.
Are we ever gonna see a year like that again? Kenny, of course, but like
Malik Willis.
I hope not. I remember watching Malik Willis, who is like projected to go like number 2 in the draft, like in all the mocks. I'm like, this guy looks undraftable. This guy looks dog, like terrible. Yeah. Same thing with Corral. Ritter and Pickett were I liked Ritter the most, but I didn't like Howell either. But he's probably the best.
They're all fringe NFL starters. You know, you got 3 of those guys out of the class, so that's something. But I'm totally with you on the Caleb point. I think he's incredible. It's crazy how fast you can go from generational prospect to
Zach
bust.
Wilson.
Yeah, to Zach Wilson. Based really just on team results and maybe painting nails and crying after a football game.
And the Notre Dame game where he
the
did
Notre Dame
force
game,
some
he was
things.
legitimately bad. Right.
But even watching that Notre Dame game, you can tell he's the best player out there. He was just forcing shit,
Yeah.
The picks were horrible, but just watching him move around, you can tell that there's no Notre Dame player better at football than him. He just made some bad mistakes, which obviously isn't good. But you say that bad mistakes don't make Josh Allen a bad quarterback, a lot of people say. I think it's kind of the same deal.
I'm 100% with you on the upside of great creators like that totally outweighing. And it's obviously not like Caleb's been mistake prone. He had a mistake prone game.
No, he's thrown 14 picks in 1,000 career pass attempts at USC.
Yeah.
It's not like bad picks are a common theme with him. I think he's incredible.
Not at all. I really do think that if USC had not a bottom 10 defense in all of college football, everybody would still be frothing at the mouth over Caleb. So it's a silly way of viewing things.
There is a quarterback that does like to throw pretty bad picks, and that's where I'm going to go with this question. One narrative that's been developing during the season is that Tua is a legitimate MVP candidate, which I just baffles me, man. I don't even think Tua is the best MVP candidate on his own team, dude.
You're talking to the right guy.
Yeah. I mean, his numbers, 2006.
Bro has found the choir, and he is preaching to it.
Go on.
I don't get. I know statistically, you can look at the numbers: 2,609 yards, 19 TDs, 7 picks. Whoop-de-woo. The Dolphins are 6-3. The teams they've beat have a cumulative record of 13-34. They've beaten 3 of the worst teams in the league: the Pats twice, the Giants, the Panthers. In victories, I'll give them credit, 320 passing yards, 3 TDs, 1 pick, 70% completion percentage. But against the 3 real teams they've played, or even remotely real teams, Buffalo, Kansas City, Philly, they lose all the games. He goes from 320 yards to 230. He goes from 3 TDs to 1 TD. And he goes from 1 interception to basically 1 turnover per game with less than completion percentage. And I feel like all the big plays that I think of with Tua are just missed throws or wounded duck picks. I don't know, man. I'm not. Shout out to Tua for being good in the system, man. He's not a top 10 QB, and he damn sure isn't an MVP candidate. If we're gonna reward somebody on that offense, can we please give it to Tyreek? I don't know, man. I don't get it week in, week out.
He's probably a top 10 quarterback, especially now because all the other candidates have gone down with the injury. But he's not in that elite tier. Mm-hmm. The accuracy and the rhythm and the timing, I think, is all very impressive with him, and not everybody could do it. But I think especially versus the Chiefs, it was clear he's such a liability out of structure. He's got nothing. And on those deep shots, it's clear that he's a pretty bottom tier NFL athlete. And I just don't know how you could give him the MVP over a guy like Mahomes, who has the same numbers, but his wide receivers are way worse than what Tua is dealing with. And I think even Kelsey has lost a step this year, unless his girlfriend is in attendance. The tackles have been bad in Kansas City. The guards, the interior of the offensive line, which is usually a bunch of all pros, hasn't quite been up to their usual par, although certainly not a negative force for the team. And he still has numbers just as good as Tua and is at the top of all the advanced analytics in terms of quarterback play. And the structure around him is not what Miami has right now. And he's actually beat good teams, Miami being one of them. Obviously, the head-to-head doesn't really matter, but still, he's gotten it done against better teams than Tua has. So
yeah,
I don't know where the argument for Tua MVP comes from. Not that he's not in the conversation, or maybe if you were to make a top 10, maybe I'd put him in there because there's not that been that. It hasn't been a good year for NFL offense in general.
No.
So for the quarterback of the number 1 team, sure, throw him in there. But to put him over Mahomes right now, or even a guy I think Dak, I'd probably vote for Dak above Tua or a couple different quarterbacks. And Tyreek,
Lamar, Hurts, man.
Lamar, Hurts has been so much better recently too. I'd probably put them over him as well. So I I don't think Tua's trash, but he's not an MVP candidate.
I feel a bit bad, honestly, because whenever we talk about Tua, it feels like we are just trying to bring expectations in the conversation a bit more down to earth, and sometimes that can come across more negatively than intended. Like, of course, Tua doesn't suck. Everything you guys said, I totally agree with. When he is able to throw with ideal timing, his anticipation, his placement is excellent. But he is so privileged. He throws to his first read, I think, more than like any other quarterback in football, because his first read is pretty much always great.
It has to be, because his time to throw is like 2.3 seconds. So it's like clearly things are working pre-snap, because and like, you can just make that decision.
Exactly. He's playing with, I think, the best offensive coach in football. He is playing on the fastest offense that I have ever seen. So I love the way that you articulate this, Theo, when you say that quarterback stats are always passing offense stats. It's just 100% true, and people try to make these apples-to-apples comparisons. You can't compare Tua's stats in a vacuum to Josh Allen's, and one of them is doing so much to go above and beyond creating and trying to overcome circumstance, and the other is just doing a good job of executing an offense in an incredibly privileged situation, and then we've seen it. Like, Logan, you mentioned the stats in the 3 games against the good football teams. I think those are the only top 20 scoring defense that the Dolphins have faced this year. Like, those are the only respectable teams that they've played. And I saw it in person against the Bills. I was at that game. And when you're able to get pressure, when you're able to disrupt that timing, when you're able to force him outside of the pocket, it's not just that he can't make those high upside plays. That's when he starts to melt down. And that's when he starts to get careless with the football and make some of those killer mistakes. So I think that we all agree on this, and we are literally
him and Brock Purdy both. Him and Brock Purdy both, because Purdy's numbers are just as good, if not better, than Tua's, and he's not an MVP candidate.
Yeah,
to me,
they're very similar, and I think that Purdy does do a little bit more creating out of structure. I think he's a little bit of a better athlete. He's got a little bit more of that magician in him, but for the most part,
but he's worse at the timing and accuracy part of it. I would say.
Agreed, and I think that he is probably a bit more careless with the football as well. I think they both have those like head scratching interceptions more often than some people might think, but Purdy, I think, is more prone to trying to do too much probably, whereas Tua sometimes it's just like, oh wow, he literally can't get that ball there, or he is under pressure and things start to fall apart a little bit. Very quickly, I think that, Theo, your Caleb take sort of reminds me of the Kyler Murray situation that we were looking at, where everybody decided before this year, not everybody, but there was a significant portion of the NFL fandom that was like, oh yeah, this guy's just not good. And you would see these quarterback tier lists, and it would be like Daniel Jones 2 tiers above Kyler. And I think
I remember that one.
Already in his return, we have been reminded of what he is as a one-man offense, how uniquely great he is extending plays and creating outside of structure, and the arm talent that you see on the throw to basically win the game last week, and how he extended that play as well. Like, Kyler's really good at football. I do think that Arizona is going to move off him. I think that situation, it just seems like the relationship is fractured. But I think that if they do, they are going to get a real haul for him, and I think that he can be a really good quarterback on a really good team with a better roster and situation.
I don't know if they'll move off of him. But I agree that he's a valuable quarterback and an engine to the offense. And if you're a team like Minnesota without a starter, and I could see it happening. If he shows that he's like worth the contract, and the Cardinals have a really high draft pick, and they have the opportunity to add Caleb, who I think is like better than Kyler Murray, like a better prospect than Kyler Murray. I could see it happening, but I also think you could get a haul for that, like a way bigger haul for that first overall pick. And if you already have Kyler, you might trade that Drake May chance to get an absolute. I mean, they already have the Texans pick.
So would you view it as, if they get the number 1 pick, which they're probably not at this point now that they have 2 wins, but they still could? If you had number 1, would you take Caleb and trade Kyler? And if you had any other pick, would you trade the pick or draft outside the quarterback position and keep Kyler?
Man, it's tough to say. And it's tough to say when you don't know what the market for Kyler is like. I would say
true.
If the market for the first overall pick is like way bigger than what you'd get for Kyler, boy, I don't know. I'd probably trade the pick, because you'd get so many resources. Like, you could get maybe 3 firsts, and like you could build a
Yeah.
really, really good team. But if it's like even, I don't know, maybe you take Caleb on the rookie deal, and he's probably pretty Kyler-esque in the first place, so you're just kind of resetting that timeline. You already have a bunch of draft resources. Why not need more? Like, you probably don't need too many more, like, to build a good team. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating. I don't know about the behind-the-scenes stuff. I think with Kingsbury and I guess Bidwill is still there, the owner, who's terrible, so maybe he's. Yeah, and they did put in that video game contract clause in his contract, so you could be right.
That's a real component in my thinking. Is it just feels like the vibes and the relationship are bad, and also like the fan base. Maybe this will change. Maybe they'll see now how bad things can be without Kyler, and he'll come back and maybe he wins them a couple games in unbelievable fashion. Then they're like, oh wow, he's our savior. But it felt like everybody was kind of just done with him, like Cardinals fans and. There comes
Cardinals
a point
teammates,
where
honestly.
Cardinals teammates, and obviously they gave him the massive contract. But when you're 5 years deep with a relationship and it feels like things have stagnated, sometimes it just runs its course, and it's not a question of the talent of the guy. It's just like, all right, this situation, we're kind of done, and we're going to move on, and we're going to try to pivot. And if they do get a high enough pick this year, and if they do have a quarterback talent that they like enough, I could really see that happening. And I do think, as big as that contract is, teams would move a lot for Kyler, because a game-changing quarterback talent like that, it's what literally everybody is looking for. So
yeah,
it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, it's the most fascinating like dynamic in the league right now, easily. There's no one else that important who's maybe Justin Jefferson, but like I think Kyler's more likely to get moved. So
unfortunately,
it probably is him.
Stephon Diggs may be in those conversations now.
Stephon Diggs is in those conversations.
Oh, what a bummer. What a bummer. It's also surprising. I did not think Kyler was going to play this year.
Yeah.
I just thought, like, with where the relationship is at, where the Cardinals were at, if he's going to miss until week 10, I thought maybe they would just let Buddy sit this one out. But it's fun to see him back out there, and I think it's going to drive up his trade value. I think Kyler playing more football is only going to be a good thing for him and for the Cardinals if they do want to move him or if they want to build around him.